I sat at the mahogany dining table, staring at the legal document in front of me. My wife Vanessa drummed her fingers impatiently while her mother Eleanor leaned over my shoulder like a vulture. The whole family was there, Brandon, Vanessa's brother, and his wife Kelly, all watching me like I was some kind of circus act. The papers felt heavy in my hands, but not as heavy as the silence that filled the room. "Just sign it, innocent," Vanessa said, her voice sharp with irritation. "It's just paperwork." But I'd learned to read legal documents during my years working at the insurance company. This wasn't just paperwork. This would transfer my voting rights in the family business to Eleanor, making her the sole decision-maker. My hands shook as I held the pen. Eleanor's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife. "You've always been a burden to this family, innocent. This is the least you can do for us." The words hit me like a physical blow. A burden. After 8 years of marriage, after everything I'd contributed, that's what I was to them. I clutched the pen tighter, but something inside me refused to move it toward the signature line. "Eleanor's right," Vanessa said, crossing her arms. "You're being selfish, innocent. We're trying to protect the family business here." My heart shattered. The woman I'd promised to love and cherish was now joining the chorus against me. I looked around the table at faces that had once welcomed me warmly. Now they all looked at me with barely concealed contempt. "I don't understand why you're fighting this," Brandon added, adjusting his expensive watch. "Mother knows what's best for the company." I felt trapped, surrounded by people who were supposed to be my family. They'd raised their voices, ganged up on me, made me feel small and worthless. But as I stared down at the document again, something caught my eye. There, in small print at the bottom of page 3, was a clause I'd missed before. My blood ran cold as I read it carefully. This wasn't just about voting rights. This document would make Eleanor the sole beneficiary of all family business assets, including the shares that legally belonged to me through my marriage to Vanessa. They weren't just asking me to give up control. They were asking me to give up everything. The clause was buried in legal jargon, but its meaning was crystal clear. If I signed this document, I would forfeit my right to any proceeds from the family business, both now and in the future. Eleanor would own everything outright. I set the pen down and looked up at the expectant faces around me. "This says I give up all financial interest in the company." "Don't be dramatic," Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "You'll still have your job at the insurance office." But I wasn't being dramatic. I was being thorough. And as I studied their faces more carefully, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. None of them looked surprised by what I'd discovered. Brandon wouldn't meet my eyes. Kelly suddenly became very interested in her manicure. Even Vanessa was avoiding my gaze. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked quietly. The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a calculated betrayal that had been months in the making. "Planning what?" Eleanor laughed, but it sounded forced. "Innocent, you're overreacting to a simple legal procedure." "Simple?" I stood up from my chair. "This document strips me of every financial right I have in this family." "You're being paranoid," Vanessa snapped. "Nobody's trying to steal from you." They started talking over each other then, all trying to convince me that I was imagining things. Their voices blended together in a chorus of manipulation and gaslighting. I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by their coordinated assault on my reality. That's when Brandon leaned close to my ear and whispered something that made my blood freeze. "Face it, innocent. You'll never give this family what it really needs. You can't even give Vanessa children." The room spun. My infertility had been a source of private pain for years, something Vanessa and I had struggled with together. Or so I thought. Apparently, she'd been sharing our most intimate struggles with her family, turning my medical condition into ammunition against me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I ran from that room like my life depended on it. I locked myself in the guest bedroom, my heart pounding against my ribs. The cruel laughter from downstairs drifted through the floor, and I knew they were celebrating what they thought was their victory over the weak, broken man who couldn't even fulfill his basic duty as a husband. But as I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to catch my breath, my eyes fell on my briefcase in the corner. Inside was an envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment to share the news with my family. With shaking hands, I pulled out the letter from Carson and Associates, the law firm that had been handling my father's estate. Dad had died 2 years ago, and the legal proceedings had been complicated and slow. But this letter changed everything. According to the document, my father had left me a controlling stake in a piece of commercial property that I'd never even known he owned. Property that, according to the appraisal attached to the letter, was worth nearly $3 million. For the first time all evening, I smiled through my tears. Dinner was a tense affair. Eleanor had prepared her famous pot roast, but everything tasted like cardboard in my mouth. The family chatted about mundane things, but I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation. They were all waiting for me to break, to give in and sign their precious document. Eleanor raised her wine glass, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced. "To family, and to cutting out dead weight." The words were clearly aimed at me. Brandon chuckled and raised his glass. Kelly smirked. Even Vanessa lifted her wine without protest. My chest burned with humiliation and rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. I thought about the letter upstairs, about the property I now owned, about the power they didn't know I possessed. I raised my own glass slowly, meeting Eleanor's triumphant gaze across the table. "Funny you should say that," I said, letting a small smile play at the corners of my mouth. The confidence in Eleanor's expression flickered for just a moment. "What's that supposed to mean?" Vanessa asked, setting down her wine glass with a sharp clink. I took a sip of my drink, enjoying the way their casual confidence was starting to crack. "Oh, just that my father left me something valuable when he passed. Something I think you'd all find very interesting." Eleanor's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What kind of something?" "Let's just say it changes the family dynamic considerably," I replied, cutting into my pot roast with deliberate slowness. Brandon and Kelly exchanged glances. The easy laughter from earlier had died completely, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that filled the dining room like smoke. "Stop being cryptic, innocent," Eleanor snapped. "If your father left you something, we should know about it. We're family." Family. The word tasted bitter now, after everything they'd put me through today. But I just smiled and took another bite of dinner. Vanessa's voice was sharp with suspicion. "I want to see whatever paperwork you're talking about. Tonight." The desperation in her demand told me everything I needed to know. They were scared. After dinner, I was clearing dishes when I felt someone slip a folded piece of paper into my hand. I looked up to see Oliver, Brandon's quiet cousin who'd married into the family 5 years ago. He was often overlooked at family gatherings, treated more like hired help than a family member. I waited until I was alone in the kitchen to unfold his note. In careful handwriting, it read, "I know what they're doing. Don't give in. Meet me in the garden at midnight." My heart raced. I wasn't completely alone after all. Someone else had seen through their scheme. I glanced through the kitchen window and saw Oliver trimming the hedges in the backyard, acting perfectly normal. But when he caught my eye, he gave the slightest nod. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe properly. The family had made one crucial mistake in their plan to destroy me. They'd assumed I had no allies, no one who would stand up for me. They were wrong. The next morning, Vanessa appeared in the kitchen with a bouquet of my favorite flowers and a carefully practiced expression of remorse. "Innocent, honey, I'm sorry about yesterday," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I think we all got a little carried away. Maybe we should just forget about the whole business document thing and focus on us. But even as she spoke, I could see Eleanor lurking just around the corner of the hallway, trying to listen to our conversation. This apology wasn't genuine, it was another manipulation tactic. I took the flowers and smiled. "That's really thoughtful of you, Vanessa. I appreciate it." Her face brightened, thinking she'd succeeded in softening me up. "So you'll consider signing the papers? For the sake of family peace?" I pretended to think about it, letting hope build in her eyes. "You know what? Maybe I've been too stubborn about this whole thing." "Really?" The relief in her voice was palpable. I nodded slowly, hiding my smirk as I arranged the flowers in a vase. Let them think they'd won. It would make my eventual victory all the sweeter. That night, I lay in bed pretending to sleep while Vanessa showered. The walls in our old house were thin, and voices carried easily through the heating vents. I could hear Eleanor and Vanessa talking in the kitchen below, their words floating up through the floor. "I think he's going to crack," Vanessa was saying. "He seemed much more reasonable today." Eleanor's laugh was cold and calculating. "Good. Once he signs that document, he's nothing. Just another expense we can cut loose." "What if he finds out about the property clause?" "He won't. Men like Innocent don't read the fine print. They just do what they're told." My hands clenched into fists under the covers. They were planning to discard me like garbage the moment I gave them what they wanted. I quietly reached for my phone and started recording their conversation. "By this time next week, we'll own everything," Eleanor continued. "And your spineless husband will be out of our lives for good." The recording would be useful, but hearing their true feelings about me cut deeper than any knife. The next morning at breakfast, I played my part perfectly. "I've been thinking about what you said, Vanessa," I began, stirring my coffee slowly. "Maybe I have been too stubborn about the business documents." Eleanor's eyes lit up like a predator sensing wounded prey. "Does this mean you're ready to be reasonable?" I sighed dramatically. "I just need a little more time to think it through. Maybe we could have another family meeting this weekend?" "Of course." Eleanor practically purred. "We'll make it nice. A big family dinner, and then we can take care of the paperwork afterward." Brandon nodded enthusiastically. "That sounds perfect. We can all be there to support you through the process." Support. The word was laughable coming from them. But I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the confused, manipulated husband who was finally seeing reason. What they didn't know was that I had a meeting scheduled with Carson, my lawyer, that very afternoon. Carson's office was located in a gleaming downtown high-rise, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. He was a sharp man in his 50s with silver hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. "I've reviewed the document you sent me," he said, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. "And I have to tell you, Innocent, this is one of the most blatantly fraudulent contracts I've ever seen." My suspicions were confirmed. "So it's not legally binding?" "Not only is it not binding, but attempting to use it to steal your assets could result in criminal charges for fraud." Carson leaned back in his leather chair. "But that's not the most interesting part of your situation." He pulled out another set of documents, the papers regarding my father's estate. "Your inheritance makes you the majority shareholder in Riverside Commercial Plaza. That property generates nearly $500,000 in rental income annually. But here's the kicker, your wife's family business is one of the tenants." The irony was delicious. They needed me far more than I needed them. I spent the rest of the week playing the part of a man slowly breaking down under family pressure. I let my shoulders slump when Eleanor was around. I sighed heavily during conversations about the business. I even let Vanessa catch me staring out the window with a defeated expression. "He's almost ready," I overheard Eleanor tell Brandon on Thursday evening. "Just a little more pressure and he'll crumble completely." They increased their campaign against me. Subtle insults about my job, my appearance, my worth to the family. Each barb was designed to chip away at my self-esteem until I felt so worthless that I'd sign anything just to feel like I belonged. But every cruel comment only strengthened my resolve. They had no idea that their victim had already turned into their judge. Friday evening, Eleanor smiled at me across the dinner table with false warmth. "Tomorrow's the big day, innocent. I think you're going to feel so much better once we get all this unpleasantness behind us." I nodded meekly. "I think you're right, Eleanor. Tomorrow changes everything." Saturday evening arrived like a storm. The dining room was set with Eleanor's finest china and crystal glasses. She'd even lit candles, as if this was some kind of celebration instead of what she thought would be my financial execution. The whole family gathered around the table: Eleanor, Vanessa, Brandon, Kelly, and even Oliver, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. The legal document sat in the center of the table like a coiled snake. "Well, innocent," Eleanor said, gesturing grandly toward the papers. "Shall we get started?" I looked around at their expectant faces. Vanessa squeezed my hand, but her touch felt cold and calculating. Brandon drummed his fingers impatiently on the table. Kelly couldn't hide her smirk. I reached for the pen with a shaking hand, letting them think I was nervous for all the wrong reasons. The weight of their expectations hung in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. I picked up the documents and pretended to read them one final time. I set the papers down and pushed them slowly back toward the center of the table. "No," I said quietly. The single word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Eleanor blinked, certain she'd misheard me. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I said no. This time my voice was stronger, clearer. "I won't be signing these documents." Gasps echoed around the table. Vanessa's hand flew to her chest as if I'd physically struck her. Brandon's face turned red with indignation. "Innocent, don't be ridiculous," Eleanor sputtered. "We've been planning this for weeks." "Yes, you have." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my own folder of documents. "But I've been planning something too." The confidence drained from their faces as I placed my papers on the table. Eleanor's eyes darted between my documents and my face, trying to understand what had just happened. "Actually," I said, meeting each of their shocked stares in turn, "you're going to be needing my signature for something else entirely." I opened my folder and spread the inheritance documents across the table like a winning poker hand. The property appraisal, the rental agreements, the legal ownership papers, everything that proved I wasn't the powerless man they thought they were destroying. "It turns out my father left me Riverside Commercial Plaza," I said calmly. "You know, the property where your family business has been renting space for the past 15 years. Eleanor's face went white as snow. Her hands trembled as she reached for the documents, scanning them desperately as if she could make the words change through sheer force of will. "This can't be right," she whispered. "Oh, it's very right. I'm your landlord now." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying their shocked silence. "And according to these rental agreements, you're 3 months behind on payments." Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Kelly looked like she might faint. But it was Vanessa's expression that gave me the most satisfaction, the dawning realization that her worthless husband had just become the most important person in the room. "So about that signature you need," I continued smoothly. "Let's discuss terms. You planned this." Vanessa exploded, jumping up from her chair so violently that her wine glass toppled over. "You knew about the inheritance all along. Just like you planned to steal my business shares." I replied calmly, watching red wine spread across Eleanor's white tablecloth. That's when my mild-mannered husband completely lost control. His face contorted with rage as he slammed his fists on the table. "You ruined everything," he screamed. "We had it all figured out. You were supposed to sign the papers and disappear." The mask had finally slipped. This wasn't about business or family, this was about greed, pure and simple. They'd planned to rob me blind and then discard me like trash. There it is, Oliver said quietly from his corner. The truth finally comes out. I looked over to see Oliver holding up his phone, the camera pointed directly at Vanessa's meltdown. He'd been recording the entire scene. You got all of that? I asked. Oliver smiled for the first time all evening. Every word. By Sunday morning, Oliver had uploaded carefully edited clips to social media. Not enough to violate anyone's privacy, but enough to show the kind of people the family really were. He posted them with vague captions about toxic family dynamics and standing up to bullies. The response was swift and brutal. Eleanor's friends from the country club started calling, wanting to know if the rumors were true. Brandon's business partners began asking uncomfortable questions about his character. But the message that surprised me most came from my estranged sister Hannah. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since she'd had her own falling out with Vanessa's family. I saw the posts, her text message read. I always knew they were poison. I'm proud of you for standing up to them. Call me. I stared at the message for a long time. Hannah had tried to warn me about Vanessa's family years ago, but I'd been too blinded by love to listen. She'd walked away rather than watch them destroy me. Maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild that bridge. I called Hannah that afternoon, and we talked for 3 hours. She told me about her own experiences with Eleanor's manipulation, how they'd tried to turn me against her when she refused to loan them money for a failed business venture. They isolated you from everyone who cared about you, she said. That's what abusers do, they see. And my side. You don't have to face this alone anymore, she told me. I should have fought harder for you back then, but I won't make that mistake again. By the end of our conversation, I felt stronger than I had in months. The scared, isolated man who'd sat at that dinner table was gone, replaced by someone who knew his worth and wouldn't accept less. Monday morning brought a desperate phone call from Eleanor. Her voice was strained, almost pleading, a far cry from the imperious tone she'd used just days before. Innocent, we need to talk. Privately. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where she couldn't corner me or manipulate me with family pressure. She looked older somehow, as if the stress of the weekend had aged her years. I think we can work something out, she began, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. If you sign the business documents, I'll make sure Vanessa doesn't divorce you. I almost laughed. She still thought I was the desperate, clingy husband who would do anything to save his marriage. Eleanor, I said gently, what makes you think I don't want the divorce? The color drained from her face. This wasn't the response she'd expected. You can't mean that. Vanessa is your wife. You love her. I loved who I thought she was. Turns out that person never existed. Vanessa filed for divorce the next day, probably thinking she could claim half of my newfound inheritance in the settlement. Her lawyer was expensive but not particularly bright. He'd clearly assumed this would be a simple case of dividing marital assets. What he hadn't counted on was Hannah representing me, armed with recordings of their conversations and a prenuptial agreement that everyone had forgotten about. Your client waived all claims to premarital assets, Hannah informed Vanessa's lawyer during our first mediation session. That includes inheritance from family members. The prenup had been Eleanor's idea originally, designed to protect their family business from my potential claims. Now it was protecting my inheritance from theirs. The judge was not impressed when she heard the recordings of their fraud attempt. Not only did Vanessa get nothing from my inheritance, but the judge froze the family business accounts pending investigation into their attempted fraud. The hunter had become the hunted. 2 weeks later, Eleanor tried to salvage the family's reputation at the annual Chamber of Commerce dinner. She stood at the podium in her best dress, trying to spin the story in their favor. Sometimes families go through difficult periods, she told the assembled business leaders. Innocent has become greedy and vindictive, trying to destroy the business that welcomed him for years. But the audience wasn't buying it. Thanks to Oliver's social media campaign and the local gossip network, most people in town knew the real story. I could see the skeptical faces, the whispered conversations, the way former friends avoided eye contact with Eleanor. That's when I stood up from my table at the back of the room. "Mrs. Walsh," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. "May I respond to those allegations?" Eleanor's face went white as she realized I was there. She'd probably hoped to smear my reputation without me being able to defend myself. The event organizer handed me a microphone, and suddenly I was standing in front of 200 of the most influential people in town. I looked out at the sea of faces, business owners, civic leaders, people who had known both our families for years. My hands were steady as I held the microphone, my voice clear and calm. 3 weeks ago, my wife's family tried to trick me into signing documents that would have stolen my legal ownership stake in their business, I began. When I refused, they called me a burden and tried to throw me away like garbage. The room was completely silent. Eleanor sat frozen at the head table, her face a mask of horror. I learned that dignity isn't something you can take from someone, it's something you choose to keep. And I learned that real family doesn't try to destroy you for their own gain. The applause started slowly, just one person clapping, then another, until the entire room was on their feet. These were people who understood business ethics, who respected integrity over greed. As I handed back the microphone, I saw Vanessa slip out the back door, unable to face the judgment in the room. I didn't take my revenge through cruelty or spite. Instead, I chose a different path entirely. The next week, I announced the establishment of the Innocent Foundation, funded by a portion of my inheritance. The foundation would provide legal assistance and temporary housing for people escaping financially abusive relationships. Economic abuse is often invisible, I told the local newspaper reporter. People use money as a weapon to control and manipulate their victims. No one should have to choose between dignity and security. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, then national ones. My story became a symbol of fighting back against family bullies and financial manipulation. Eleanor's attempted fraud became a cautionary tale, shared in business ethics courses and family law seminars. The family business never recovered from the scandal, eventually closing due to lack of customers and ongoing legal troubles. Justice didn't always require punishment, sometimes it just required truth. 6 months later, I stood in the living room of my new house, a modest place across town, far from the toxic memories of my old life. The divorce papers lay on my coffee table, finally signed and filed. Hannah was helping me hang pictures on the walls, laughing at my terrible decorating skills. Oliver and his wife had become close friends, bonding over our shared experience of surviving family dysfunction. I picked up the pen to sign the final piece of paperwork, a donation agreement for another contribution to my foundation. As I wrote my name, I smiled at the irony. The signature they had tried to force from me, the one that would have destroyed my life and dignity, had never been given. But this signature, the one that helped others escape the same trap they'd set for me, I gave freely. The signature they thought would set them free had actually set me free instead. Outside my window, I could see my new garden beginning to bloom. Like me, it was just getting started.